Does your BMW have this annoying check engine light on for the P2096 code? Well, in today's video, I'll be showing you how to fix this issue and find out what the problem is. So I've had this annoying check engine light on the dashboard for a couple weeks now, and I haven't been able to get my car inspected because I've had it on there, and so they're not going to pass the inspection. But after weeks of troubleshooting, I was able to isolate what the issue is and save you a ton of time. So yeah, in today's video, I'm basically going to be walking through everything that could be the issue with your P2096 check engine code. And now if you just go to Google and generically search up what this code means, it'll pop up post-catalyst fuel trim system to lean bank 1. So now I'm gonna actually explain to you what this check engine light means and how you can actually fix it. So coming underneath your engine bay, this is going to make a lot more sense. So to break this down, this BMW engine is an inline 6. That means it has 6 cylinders all in a straight line. These 6 cylinders are broken down into 2 banks. So you're going to have 1, 2, 3 cylinders broken down into bank 1, and then 4, 5, 6 cylinders broken down into bank 2. And so each of these BMW banks is going to be controlled by 2 of these oxygen sensors. So this is how a BMW oxygen sensor looks. And essentially you're going to have 2 of these in the front. On the side right here, that is going to be the bank 1 sensor 1 oxygen sensor. That's going to control these first 3 cylinders we talked about. And now coming back to the rear, behind it, you're going to see the silver plate. It's actually hiding another oxygen sensor. That is going to be your bank 2 sensor 1 O2 sensor. And that's going to control cylinders 4, 5, and 6. And then you're going to have 2 more of these in the exhaust system, which are going to be considered your post catalyst. And so if you remember, the check engine light that came on said post catalyst bank 1. So putting all that information together, the rear oxygen sensor located in the exhaust system, so out of reach where you can't see it, is saying that bank 1 here is getting too much air, not enough fuel. So now with that information, this is going to make troubleshooting way easier because we have somewhere to start. What is going to control the engine getting too much air and not enough fuel? Now I'll actually show you what I replaced and I troubleshooted to actually fix this issue so you don't have to spend weeks of your own time and money trying to resolve it. So from there, I immediately came under the engine bay and I thought to myself, what could cause too much air to be going inside the engine? Well, a vacuum leak. And so now anytime you're dealing with vacuum leaks, everything before the mass airflow sensor here is irrelevant. Nothing here can really cause a vacuum leak because the mass airflow sensor starts here. So everything behind the mass airflow sensor is what could cause a vacuum leak in your engine. And now from here, I immediately went to the mass airflow sensor. I went to all the ducting that leads back to the throttle body, and I made sure everything was secure. And then from there, I came to the BMW's engine and I started it up. And then I got a can of starter fluid or carb cleaner and started spraying everywhere that I thought a vacuum leak could occur. And now why you want to do that is to basically see if the engine RPM starts to move. That means you have a vacuum leak because the starting fluid is making its way inside the engine. And so if you were to look at your RPMs and see them jumping around like this, when you spray that starter fluid, that would tell you you have a vacuum leak, but my BMW's engine did not do that. Everything was perfectly fine. So now that I knew I didn't have a vacuum leak in any of the ducting, I came to the main part of the engine itself that vacuum leaks could occur, and that's going to be the valve cover on the engine. So if you guys saw, I actually dropped a video on how to replace the valve cover a couple weeks ago, and now the reason I did that is because the PCV is built on to the actual valve cover itself on these BMWs. You can't actually remove it. And when that goes defective, the engine can't regulate exhaust gases. And so I thought to myself, well, why not just replace the entire valve cover? It probably has a crack on it, or maybe the gasket's leaking, something of the sort. And yeah, I basically went ahead and did that. And as well, that did not fix the issue. From here, I started reading online. Well, check your ignition coils, check your spark plugs. Maybe something's not functioning properly and the ignition process, the actual process of burning off the fuel, is not going properly. And yeah, maybe something's just worn out. So change your spark plugs, change your coils, etc. So I did that. And then I thought to myself, halfway into troubleshooting everything, well, if the issue says it's only bank 1, it can't possibly be the fuel pump. It can't possibly be the fuel filter. Can't possibly be the ignition coils or the spark plugs or anything like that. because it's saying it's only bank 1. And on top of that, I was having no misfires at all. So I'd highly recommend you replace your spark plugs just to get it out of the way. But if you're troubleshooting an issue only pertaining to one bank, it couldn't possibly be the spark plugs or fuel pump or something like that, because those all affect the entire system itself. Like the fuel pump isn't going to make only 3 cylinders run weird. The whole engine would run weird. Multiple cylinders in different banks. So then that's when I had my breakthrough. Well, you guys remember that oxygen sensor I showed you right there tucked down beneath? That is actually going to be your bank 1 sensor 1, which is going to control all 3 of these cylinders. And so that's what I ended up replacing right here, because this O2 sensor controls the air-fuel ratio for all 3 of these front cylinders. And for anybody wondering, this is actually the O2 sensor that I replaced it with. This is the part number as well, if you need it. And I went ahead, I replaced the sensor, I cleared all the check engine lights, I hopped in the car, and I still had the check engine light come on after 10 miles. And now from here, I was really dumbfounded. I was like, well, you know, I replaced the sensor that controls those 3 cylinders. How could the engine light still possibly be on? And I'm going to explain why that is. So now from here, I went through to the engine, isolating everything that could only affect the first 3 cylinders. So remember, I already replaced the spark plugs. I already replaced the valve cover, which controls all cylinders essentially. I already replaced the O2 sensor that controls these 3 cylinders well. Now, one of the final things I can get down to is the fuel injectors on the vehicle, because the fuel injectors, there's 6 independent ones, 1 for each cylinder. So if one of the first 3 was defective, well, that could cause your issue. Now, I actually bought some cheapo ones off Amazon just to troubleshoot if this was the issue, and I ended up getting even worse performance. The engine started running crazy, so I highly recommend you don't buy cheap parts to troubleshoot. Actually buy OEM, because these were not it. So I went on FCPEuro and bought these GB remanufactured premium OE fuel injectors. And now over time, the fuel injectors on your BMW can get worse performance because they can get carbon buildup. So as you guys can see, we have a bit of carbon here on this one, but basically what ends up happening is that the tip here gets filled with carbon and it's not able to spray out the fuel properly as it should. As well, the filter here on the top, you can see we have this silver little cap. It's actually a filter that can actually get filled up with carbon buildup as well. And overall, the fuel injector will just stop spraying fuel as it should. And when this happens, you could get an engine misfire, or you could also get a lean condition because it's not spraying enough fuel as it should. And so now from here, I went ahead and replaced all 6 of my fuel injectors with these premium OE quality factory ones from FCPEuro. And now from there, I went ahead and grabbed my code scanner, I plugged it all up, and I cleared off all my check engine lights. And now I hopped in the car, I grabbed my car keys, and I was pretty hyped. I was like, hey, I fixed the issue. Now it's all good to go. Everything that's defective has been replaced. I started up the car, and I still had a check engine light. And this part was even crazier because I ended up getting 2 more check engine codes than I had before. And now I was really dumbfounded. How did I get more check engine codes than I had to start with? Well, I'm gonna explain to you why that is after I tell you the final thing I replaced to fix this issue, all in all. So now please keep following along with me. So now from here, I replaced the O2 sensor that controls these first 3 cylinders, the bank 1 sensor 1 sensor. Replaced that. I replaced all 6 of my fuel injectors, so that's already done, not an issue. The valve cover and the spark plugs all have been replaced as well. Even though that's not really going to cause the issue, that's all been done. It's been replaced. I cleaned off the mass airflow sensor to make sure that wasn't the issue. So now we know for sure I've done everything I think I could do, but there's one last thing that could fix this issue. And this, I think, is what ended up fixing everything all in all. So now remember, the code is basically telling us, hey, it's only bank 1 that's running lean, but post-catalyst, the O2 sensor in the exhaust system, that is what's throwing the code saying that the front 3 cylinders are running lean. So I basically replaced what controls the cylinders, but now I went ahead and replaced the O2 sensor that's actually throwing the code itself. Remember, we have one O2 sensor here that's controlling the 3 cylinders, the air-fuel ratio, and actually adjusting them. The one in the rear in the exhaust system is the one that detects to see if the front one is basically doing its job. So the one in the rear is what's actually throwing the code and signaling something is wrong. So now, even though the O2 sensor usually throws a code when it burns out, because the actual connector will throw a signal to the car that something's not working, even though that's usually the case, in this situation, it was not. It could be clogged. It could just not be reading correctly. Who knows what the issue could have been? But essentially, this O2 sensor was not doing its job in the rear in the exhaust. It's going to be your bank 1 sensor 2 oxygen sensor. So now, after replacing both of the oxygen sensors and all of the fuel injectors, I was confident I fixed the issue. But one of the most important things that I completely overlooked is anytime you replace the oxygen sensor, you have to completely delete and reset the engine adaptations on the vehicle. And now this is a completely different process than simply just resetting the check engine light. And now the reason why it's so extremely important that you reset the engine adaptations is because over time your engine learns. So if you have a defective part, let's say a fuel injector that's clogged, your engine's basically going to learn that it needs to put more fuel in the system to compensate for the one that's defective. So the engine's constantly learning and adjusting ratios and fuel and air and all these different things. So if we put in brand new oxygen sensors, brand new fuel injectors, all these new parts, the engine's already learned to adjust to the old defective parts. And now if you put in new parts, you're basically going to throw off all the engine, and the engine's going to run rich instead of lean, because it spent so much time running lean and trying to compensate on fuel. Putting in new fuel related parts will make the engine run rich. And that's exactly what happened in my scenario. I basically went ahead, put all these brand new parts in the engine, and then the car gave me 2 new check engine lights saying, hey, now the car is running rich. And it literally will throw you a code saying that the O2 sensors on the vehicle are bias. It'll say bias rich. So it'll say O2 sensor bank 1 is running stuck or biased rich, because you went ahead and replaced all the old parts that the car's already gotten used to with brand new one. And so now this is where I actually fixed the issue, because if we go on over to the car, but if we actually come into the vehicle systems itself, go to powertrain, and if we actually go right here to engine electronics, now we'll go to adjustment functions here at the very top. And if we scroll all the way down here, you can see delete adaptations. That's what you want to do. You want to delete the actual engine adaptations themselves, everything that our BMW's basically learned while we're driving it with the defective part. And what that'll do is essentially reset the entire engine and all the bad behaviors it's learned from having the defective O2 sensor and the defective fuel injectors or anything that could be affecting the engine. Because otherwise you're going to go ahead and replace all these parts, and then you'll go ahead and hop in the car and see that you still have a check engine light on the dashboard. But now, after replacing the defective parts, so the O2 sensors and the fuel injectors, and then deleting all the engine adaptations and clearing the codes, I was able to actually start up the car and show you guys no check engine light at all. That right there was the issue. So if you have a check engine light for the P2096 code, it is most likely because these 2 defective parts right here. Be sure to hit that subscribe button to stay in the loop on more helpful videos like this one that'll help you save precious time and money.